All right, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to Design for Drupal. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are currently a virtual conference doing monthly webinars until we can get back to our in-person event, which probably won't be until next year, but we're working up to having another Keynote later this year in July. And today we've got some folks that'll be talking to us. And for now, we'll have Leslie join and just take us through some initial information, and then we can get started. Leslie.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today at Design for Drupal Boston. This is our 13th anniversary, which is great. Today's webinar, our April webinar, is introducing Quahog, a brand new design system and web platform for the state of Rhode Island with JSON and J. And Patrick will introduce both of those folks in a minute. But thanks for joining us. Our 2020 keynote, we're just wrapping up our 2020 season with this webinar. Our 2020 keynote was Christina Chimilis, who talked about the Claro admin theme, the recording. There's a link to the recording on Design for Drupal, design4drupal.org if you want to go back and catch that if you didn't get to listen to that. That was a great keynote. We had a contribution day as part of our 2020 Design for Drupal. There are a lot of new strategic initiatives that were announced at DrupalCon that folks that are interested in design, front end, or any aspect of contributing. Some of them are listed here. You can go to the link I have here, about/core/strategic initiatives on Drupal.org to find these, but there's one decoupled menu, which is the best way for JavaScript front ends to consume configurable menus managed in Drupal. I believe Drupal will be the first platform to be consuming front ends like this for a content management system. So that's a good initiative if you're interested in that one to join. There's another one called Easy Out of the Box, and that deals with the media module, Claro, which is the admin theme that Christina had talked about in our keynote, and also Layout Builder. Making those easy and part of the standard Drupal experience is what the Easy Out of the Box initiative is. And then there's a new front-end theme, which is Claro. So, you can also help continue the work that team is doing on that. These are all open to anybody that wants to join. The best thing to do is go find the Slack channel. Each one of these has a Slack channel, and it tells you when the meetings are. Just join a meeting, and there's mentors to help out. And so those are great things if you want to get involved in actually contributing back to the Drupal project. The webinar series, this will be our last one for the 2020 season. We're getting ready for our next event. So our webinar series will resume in August. If anybody has any suggested speakers or topics, please reach out and let us know. All of our prior years' webinars can be found, the recordings on design4drupal.org. We are planning for the 2021 version of Design for Drupal Boston. Save the date, Friday, July 23rd is when we're looking to have this year's event. It will be virtual, as Patrick said. And if anybody wants to help us out with that event, it's an entirely volunteer-run group, so feel free to reach out as well. There's a new community events page on Drupal.org that lists all events, upcoming events. You can see Design for Drupal, this webinar is first on the list there. There's trainings, there's meetups, anything you want to know about what's happening in terms of events related to Drupal. You can now go to this page on Drupal.org and find everything right in one place. The code of conduct, this is a virtual webinar. The same code of conduct for the Drupal community is in effect here. Treat everybody with dignity and respect. If there's any issues at all, we don't anticipate anything, but please reach out to Patrick or myself for anything today. I want to quickly thank our sponsors, Redfin Solutions, Lullabot, McPhee Design, American Graphics Institute, Dev Collaborative, Oomph, Isovera, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Oddbird. We are going to be looking for sponsors for our 2021 season. So reach out to us again if your organization or individual would like to sponsor the webinar series for the following year. Spread the word about today's event. The hashtag is D4D Boston. And thank you for joining us once again for one of our webinars. And remember to always be kind to everybody you interact with. The last thing is we're going to use the Q&A feature to add questions during the webinar. I believe the feature is turned off. We will answer all the questions at the end of the presentation unless you feel it's very, very critical that you get it answered right away. Let us know in the Q&A. Otherwise, we'll do all those at the end. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Patrick to introduce our speakers for today.
Thanks, Leslie. And one last thing for our keynote this year, we're still looking for a keynote speaker. So if anyone has any recommendations or knows somebody who is a good speaker and talks about topics that would be applicable to design for Drupal, again, please reach out to us. We're being visited by Jason Pamental, who is a longtime collaborator with Design for Drupal and the Drupal community in general. In the past, Jason has spoken to us about variable fonts and other typography topics. And he's also an invited expert to the Web Fonts Working Group at the W3C. Jason is joined with us with J Hogue, who is the Director of Design and UX at Oomph Inc. And Jay has over 20 years of experience in design and user experience. He's also been a real estate developer and business owner, and he has most recently collaborated with Jason on a project that they will be talking to us about today. And one last note, in case it comes up, Jason's roof is actively being replaced. So if you hear any hammering noises, it's not just in your head. It's an actual hammer being used above Jason's head. And with that, Jason and Jay, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm really super excited about this. And yes, I will add that for that disclaimer, there's roofing being done right there and several other places in that direction. I've got dogs surrounding me, so we're like pretty much on brand for pandemic calls and conferences. You'll hear barking, you'll hear hammering and all sorts of things. But that's just the modern replacement for the under construction GIF that we'd normally have here. So with that mental picture, I'm Jason Pamental. Thank you very much for having me. Really excited to be here with my colleague Jay, and talk to you about something for the very first time, really. I've done a little bit of an intro for our local UX meetup, but this is, I think, definitely the most in-depth that we're going to get. So let me give you a little bit of history on this before I start sharing my screen and showing you actually what I've been working on. So for actually, the genesis of this project goes back over 4 years to some initial conversations with somebody at the D4D, the Drupal meetup in Providence, talking about replacing all of the static websites that are powering almost all of the State of Rhode Island agency websites. And it took a while and a lot of persistence, and eventually we were finally able to get this project off the ground and working in partnership with a company called NIC and their subsidiary Rhode Island Interactive, who has been doing all the web stuff for Rhode Island for many, many years. And so we pitched this process of like creating essentially a Drupal distribution to power all the agency websites. I recently have been working with the state of Georgia on a similar project. And so that really helped kind of set the stage for doing something like this. And so in combination with NIC, we worked really closely with Acquia. And then I had the good fortune of being able to then turn around and choose who I wanted to work with the development and design of this. And so I really wanted this to be a project by Rhode Islanders for Rhode Island as much as possible. So I know lots of very good people at OOMF. My wife happens to be their head of account management, and I've worked with the people there for many, many years, including John Picozzi, going back from the very first days of getting involved in Drupal back in around 2007. And so it was natural to kind of pull that team together. And I've had the good luck to basically drive this project and the design of it, actually the design of the whole platform itself. And I'm really tremendously proud of the work that we've done. It incorporates a tremendous amount of work around accessibility, around flexible user preferences. The design options that the agencies have are really pretty fantastic, and the color theming system architecture itself. We could just do a whole talk on that, and a lot of that is thanks to Jay. He's been a tremendous collaborator on this, and as much as being the Waldorf to my Statler or Laurel to my Hardy or whatever, whatever other bad puns we were coming up with for today, I think that it has been one of the most enjoyable collaborations I've worked on for one of the best possible projects. This is something that, and actually, Leslie, if you don't mind, if I can start sharing my screen, I'll show you the very first thing that we launched on this back in December. And this was a pretty big deal. The Rhode Island Department of Health did not have a dedicated site for COVID resources in the state. And that was what we decided should be the first thing that we focused on. So after starting initial research back in June of last year, we started development work in August, and we launched this first site in the early part of December. And we now have, I think, 5 sites live on the platform, and there will be another 8 or 10 that are launching in the next month or so. And there will be batches more, and by June of 2022, we'll have probably between 70 and 80 sites live. And so what is the platform? It's Drupal 9, which was super exciting for us to be able to jump straight into that. It's being driven by Pattern Lab on the design system side. So it's Pattern Lab pulled into a Drupal theme, all built into a distribution on Drupal 9 that is being hosted and delivered on Site Factory with Acquia. So we have a lot of really cool stuff that has come together on this. Everything that anybody has ever heard me talk about with responsive typography and variable fonts is built into this. Everything that we wanted to do for defining colors, ensuring accessibility, and giving design flexibility to the agencies themselves is part of this. And it really has been an incredibly quick to develop process, and it's getting better and better all the time. So here's so as you can see, there are no slides today. We're just showing you live websites and code, and that's actually I'm pretty excited to do this. It is a little bit seat of the pants, but I think that's okay. I'm perfectly all right with that. So we've got the COVID site here, and you can so this is using Layout Builder on the landing pages and lots of different flexible content components using the paragraphs module inside. And I'll give you a little bit more of an understanding of what it is that you're looking at in a minute. But I wanted to show you sort of how this looks here, but we can also show it here. And so you can see kind of what it looks like at both ends of the spectrum, and take a look at how some of these things work. And we've got languages, we've got support for light and dark modes, which you can see here. So all the things that we wanted to ensure, and I'm going to do this on the big screen too, but I just wanted to show how nicely this stuff works on the small screen. And we can do exactly the same thing here. Now, we're using 2 different ways to handle translation. This is actually Drupal's built-in multilingual stuff, and then we also have Google Translate for the agencies that can't support it. But every one of these color themes, we have 5 of them in total, has a corresponding dark mode. And Jay's going to talk a bit about how we accomplish that, which is it's pretty fantastic. So let me give you a little bit more of a tour This is another one of the agency sites, the Office of Healthy Aging, featuring me and my dad, which was kind of awesome. And so this is using the Block Island Beach?
Block Island Lighthouse.
Block Island Lighthouse color theme, as opposed to the Scarborough Beach. And just wanted to show you some of the other sites that have been set up on this platform already. We've got a whole documentation website as well. This is using the Federal Hill theme. And then another one for, this is another one that's in development that's about to launch. And this one, I'm going to show you a little bit more of the code behind this. This is one for housing resources for people who are involved in frontline healthcare efforts during the pandemic. And so I'll show you a little bit about how the patterns are working here and connecting that in code as well. So we've got a bunch of different color themes. All of this stuff is being driven on the back end through Pattern Lab. So you can see, and again, there's so many cool things to show here. These little examples of the color themes are all dynamically generated. So these color themes are all built based on the colors that we have defined. And Jay created this fantastic table down here that will actually show you color contrast ratios of every combination of all the colors that we've defined in here. So from the very beginning, we've been thinking about what combinations are legit, what can we do to ensure that we are supporting WCAG 2.1, AA, and in some cases, we're pretty close to AAA compliance in terms of color contrast and text sizes and everything throughout. So this was really pretty cool. This is generated as part of building Pattern Lab, and this shows kind of everything. It's got, if we want to show all the global stuff, we want to look at text, we can see all the different text styles that are in here. It's the entire design system, self-contained. And then if we wanted to take a look at, I'm trying to remember where some of our teasers are, because I wanted to show you that.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. So so this is what we were showing. This is the data view, showing just loading in localized data to show you the pattern here. And one of the things that is so cool with Pattern Lab is that you can also take a look at what does the twig look like, what does the rendered HTML look like. So we use this as a tool, and there is a public URL that I will be sharing at some point, so you can actually look at this live, but it's also all on GitHub. That's the thing that I'm so excited about this, that we have all three of these repositories, the Pattern Lab, the profile, the install profile for it, and the entire distribution is all publicly available on GitHub. If you just go to GitHub and look for State of Rhode Island ECMS, that is the place where you can find this, and you can see all of this code, fork it, do what you like with it, and we're really excited to see where this goes in the future. So this is a lot of how it looks. I want to show you how we make some of it, and so one of the things that I know we showed you the color stuff, but I also wanted to show you is what we're doing with the variable fonts here. And you can see everything scaling really nicely. And I'll show you some of the code behind that as well. We're using variable fonts to allow us to add a lot more nuance to the weight and how we use these. So we're powering all of this by loading only 3 font files. There's one for Roboto Slab, and then there's 2 for Work Sans, regular and italic. And we do a lot of things, like when we switch over to dark mode, we subtly adjust the weight of the text so that the reverse contrast is more readable. And all of those things that we were showing you about how we can adjust font size and spacing are all taking that into account as well. So when we go from light to dark mode, we're actually lightening the weight of the text just a little bit, because when you reverse that contrast, it can often make it a little bit harder to read. It gets a little bit fatter and a little fuzzier. So I'm gonna go back, and you'll note also you can switch it manually, or you can go by the system preference. So if you have your phone or your desktop set to dark mode and come to this website in the first place, then you'll see it automatically in that other mode. But because some people would prefer it one way or the other, we also allow people to set a preference, and all of that's handled with a combination of either cookies or local storage that we're doing all of that. So let's take a look at what's going on with the color themes, because this is actually something that we've built all the way through from working in Pattern Lab and developing like those color theme swatches that you can see on through how it interacts with everything on up through fallbacks to browsers that do and don't support some of these features, and then into the Drupal admin theme itself. So if we take a look at what's going on there, I'd love to have Jay kind of walk us through a little bit of how all of this works. And so basically everything is, and what I have open here, and I hope this is big enough for everybody to read, is the color configuration file that's in Pattern Lab. And everything is defined in this one file. It all starts here. So Jay, do you want to give us a little bit of a tour, and I can kind of scroll up and down and show some other stuff?
Yeah. Right. A quick note: JSON makes sense. It's the most portable language to put all this stuff in. But we ended up using HJSON, human readable JSON, to be able to leave comments and make it more meaningful. And that is part of our build process that my colleague Jordan helped put together. There's a whole gulp process that turns the HJSON into JSON, makes all the variables and stuff accessible to our Sass, as well as Twig and PHP. So as Jason said, it's one file to rule everything because it's being translated into a set of variables for all of the other languages that we require. So if you scroll down, the first section of the array here is our color definitions. And the way we wanted to do this was a human readable name, a kind of a hue to help describe where that color sits, what beyond a cute name like calamari, what's the actual value of that color, what's the hue. And we are using the HSL color space to help define and make that also understandable when you look at it. If you understand CSS and HSL, you'll also probably know it's a lot easier to parse and think about than RGB. But this all gets translated later on. So we really took our attempt to make sure that this was made for the people that were using it. The needs part of it was an attempt also to start to describe how it should be used in an accessible fashion. It's not perfect. I early on had a thought that maybe we could use that in some calculations. So we didn't end up doing that, but it might be possible later on to try to leverage a bit of data like that to help drive some of the accessibility decisions later on. But getting ahead of myself, probably.
Jay, that was actually something that the team at Lullabot working on the Georgia platform was indeed able to do. So that was kind of where the genesis of this came from. And I think, as you say, it's something that we can work towards, but it's also at least a good cue for ourselves to be thinking these things through, because it's not always light mode or dark mode. It's when you have a component that you put on the screen that has a dark background, we want to be intelligent about that stuff there. And that's something we've been working our way through.
Yeah. So all the colors are defined as such. We came up with a naming convention to keep the naming clean. So we have a base color. We have, maybe it's dark or light, maybe it's transparent. Sometimes it's saturated or it's warmed up slightly. The name will try to make sense of where that color sits in the family. We've got reds, we've got accent colors, we've got our base colors, etc. We've got some fun naming conventions, all of them Rhode Island related somehow. And then the real fun begins when you start to get into the palettes themselves. So here we start to describe a palette. All the palettes reference the colors that are defined above. So you're not allowed to have a palette use a color that's outside of the theme. In order to define a color and bring it in, it has to be part of the system. So the first color palette that we have here is called Scarborough. That's our default. Again, machine name, human name, and then the values. The way that we did the theming was to think about the entire page or the set of design components as whether or not they need to have their own naming structure and theming structure. So official references the very, very topmost bar of the front end theme, where we have this is an official Rhode Island state, and we have the controls for changing light mode, dark mode, and font size, etc. If you understand these things as rows of part of a design template, it hopefully starts to make sense. So then in each one of those bands, we set a foreground color, we set a background color, we set some link colors potentially. That's where all of this is coming from and what it's leading towards. So in the default theme, we've got a Quahog light, which is a very, very light gray, is sitting on top of a very, very dark navy color, and links are white. Focus color is orange, and hover color is orange. Then you go to the header. Then you go to the main navigation, right? You can start to see the pattern that we've started here, where we are trying to name every part of the theme, everything that needs to be themed in a section. So we can think about these things in those kind of horizontal stripes. Default is a pretty big block, which takes care of a lot of body declarations and default link declarations. But because of that, you can start to see why putting in comments is very helpful. So that helps someone navigate this entire system. Then we've got things like icons, and we've got things like the sidebar navigation, which is nav minor. We have a couple other things like the notification bar. Each one of our palettes goes through and defines each component, each global component that we've thought about as part of that system. So when you're creating a new theme, you really have to think about everything all together. And then we have a couple flexible bits. So we have a primary and a primary light. These help drive the smaller components that may not need their own definition, but they can all share a definition. So the little attention cards, the blocks, and sometimes some of the blocking that an author can use further down a page just to give some visual interest to a page is all driven by these. So each theme can also have its own primary and primary light sub-theme, basically, so that they have a lot of flexibility when they're putting a page together. If you scroll down just a little bit further, I wanted to touch on dark mode. So we've defined Scarborough light. We also have to define Scarborough dark. And the great thing about CSS is that we have really taken advantage of the way that the cascade works. So we're only defining what needs to change. Because these are both the default theme, everything is defined. But if you go down further, if you explore this file a little bit further, other themes, there's a little hash mark, there's a couple of them here, in front of a definition. Basically, it keeps it in there so you know what it is, but it's commented out, which means it's defaulting to the value of the theme above it, essentially the default theme. So if Federal Hill doesn't need to change the foreground color, I've got that commented out. I can later on go on and change that, but now if I look at that, I know the actual color is coming from the Scarborough theme. So we did that for a couple reasons, but we really wanted to we didn't want to define everything every single time. We wanted to keep things as light as possible, so there's only variables in here that need to be defined because they're changing something off of the default theme.
And Jay, one thing I forgot to mention early on for everybody is that in the way we've layered these things, we've done it very much from the mindset of progressive enhancement, where we start by defining these defaults, and then if the browser supports, custom properties, it uses CSS custom properties, but the fallbacks are already there, defined by these variables. And then we do the same thing with the type and typography. So where it's supported, it always gets the best possible version of it, but we build up to that. And so we're supporting all of these browsers along the way. We're still sorting out some of the IE 10 and 11 fixes, but in general, we even have light and dark mode working there. So it's actually, we did one polyfill for adding basic support of custom properties at the root level of the page in IE, and everything else is really very flexible. So we have a very functionally equivalent experience across the board. Even with the IE browsers.
Right.
Still a work in progress with some of those things, but it works
Well,
really
because
well.
yeah, IE is going to be IE, but we did a pretty good job of supporting 11, as you said, with a JavaScript polyfill that will make sure that CSS variables are working as expected. So that's a walkthrough of the color configuration file. From that color configuration file, I don't know if you have one ready to pull up, Jason, but maybe one of the SAS files under base, I believe, for the colors. We can show you how those things get sucked in and churned into actual CSS. So yeah, this file does quite a bit, and it's also pretty well commented. But these are the ways that we are able to take what the JSON gives us as SAS variables and loop over these arrays now, and be able to spit out all the variables, all the CSS properties that we need in order to run the themes. So there's a lot going on here too. Besides this, I won't get into it, but we are outputting the defaults without a theme name, so that even if there's no theme name, we get Scarborough. If there is a theme name, there's CSS that drives all of those things. And then there's light and dark mode taken care of in this as well. So really, the custom properties are what is running light and dark mode variations. So we're changing the definition of colors, and everywhere a color is used, it's referring back to that functional color name. So in the definition of a particular design component, it's not referencing the name of a color at all. It's referencing the functional name of that theme row, essentially. So that's how we were able to abstract that and make it so that our front-end development team is really just only concerned about, oh, this is the official block, I need the official foreground color. They're not concerned about what that maps to. That's right. The theme designer's concern.
And it also means that all of the theming options are driven by a selection that adds a single class to the body, and that's it. And everything is driven from there. And then, like Jay said, with the absence of that, you just get the default, and everything just kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
So Jay, I wanted to actually, so I have a couple of things open so we can show this a little bit kind of in action here, where if we're looking here, this is in the install profile. This would be the Drupal template file for one of those hotel teasers. And so really all it's doing, so what we've done is and the thing with Pattern Lab, to do it really effectively, you're working to get markup out of the Drupal templates and only pass it into a Pattern Lab pattern. And so the way we do that is in the Drupal template, you do an include. And so this is going and it's looking in organisms to hotels grid to get that grid, pattern. And then it's passing in the data. So this is the glue between Drupal and then passing this in. Now I grabbed the wrong one as the hotel listing rather than the hotel teaser, but the same basic idea. And then when you look at this over in Pattern Lab, you see something that's much more expected. You have the divs, the wrappers, the spans, and then you've got twig code in here with your conditionals, if the values are supplied, then echo these things out. And so you can see, we're following our naming conventions and then just echoing out the data as we have it. And so that's it. Everything is divided up into these tiny little pieces. And then if we want to look at the SAS that goes along with it, you can see everything is driven off this base. And then you can see here are the default values, foreground color default, I'm getting the naming wrong, but you see like everything is driven off these either custom properties or SAS stuff where we need it, and it keeps our rewriting of these things to a minimum. So Jay did a great job doing all of the markup with that, and you can see the result of it is something when we look at this site, they never have to do any overlays with the photo. It's all done with CSS, and you can see we've got different ways that you can do it, whether it's a dollar value or a percent, and like all the layouts work really nicely. And all of this is then driven on the back end just with a really simple node form to input all of those values, and they go in and update these things all the time. And the other thing that I wanted to show was what we did to tie this into the admin side of things. So this is one of the demo sites that I'm logged into, and we tied it all to the theme. Jordan did a really great job of creating some theme settings so that per agency, they can go in and customize anything that any of this text here in the header, as well as all of these blocks of text down in the footer. So if we come back up here and we go under appearance to the settings for the theme, if we want to set that color palette, and this is again how we've driven things from writing it in HJSON and then using SAS to build up static values and the CSS custom properties and make something available over here, where this is also reading some of that JSON to get our list of palettes. So if we want to change this one to Federal Hill, we can save that configuration and go back to the site, and everything is automatically recolored. So this is where that HSL-A alpha comes into play, where we have all of this flexibility to be able to make these things work and have everything work in combination and kind of actively with itself. So when we go and switch over to dark mode with this, a lot of these things aren't changing at all. Like these elements here aren't changing. They're actually done with transparency, so that if you change the underlying background color, this is what you get. And we have the options, as Jay had mentioned about primary light and primary dark. This is the primary light background color applied to this section through the layout builder. And so it's really cool that we can actually go in here and hit layout, and we can go into one of these sections and configure it, and we have it all tied in here. Primary light, or coffee milk are some of the options that we give for all of these. And then if you layer one on top of the other, because the transparency builds, you can get this really nice layered effect in there to define a space without being too overt. But if we then want to change that and update it, we can, and instantly it's going to be available and still working just as nicely in the light and dark mode.
Yeah, design-wise, we made a decision that dark mode didn't mean pitch black. We wanted things to still have a little bit of nuance and some softness to them. So the grays and the blacks and the Quahog colors we're using have a little bit of warmth, and this option to be able to use opacity as well and transparency, I think, just adds to that. It's a much softer dark mode, I think.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that, so in coming around to a lot of these decisions, a lot of it's been informed by other people that I've met giving talks on accessibility, both at Drupal events and sort of in the wider web community. And that's kind of how we got on the subject of how contrasty should high contrast be. And oftentimes that absolute black and white, it can be just as jarring for some people as something a little softer. So that's why we aimed for a little bit softer, but also respecting user preferences while allowing a choice to override. So any of the animation can be reduced if you have reduced motion settings set in your operating system, and will turn things off automatically. Likewise, if you have selected dark mode for your OS, you will automatically see the dark mode of this, but you can override if you choose. So the other thing that I thought I would show briefly as part of it, so it's a bit of a jarring segue, I apologize, but this is the Site Factory interface, and this is where we can go in and create a brand new site and start to spin it up and log in and make some of those choices for the header and the footer and all those things and the theme. And the whole process, we see them all here. If we need to duplicate one or start, create one sort of based on another one, we can do all of that in Site Factory here to duplicate one or create a new site. It's really just with a click of a button. So all of this stuff has packaged up really well and allowed us to get, like I did a little demo with our own core team yesterday at the state to show them how we could set up this climate change site. And it really only took, I think it took us 45 minutes to go from nothing to creating the site to even going through the migration process and adding in some of the content. So we scraped and migrated all of the content and brought it in over here, and all of it just kind of worked. So it's really helping us like have these tools pulled together to create all this variety with these sites, so that we can keep up with this pace of doing like 15 sites or so every 3 months as we go through this process. And so, all of these things were hard to get going initially, but the value in this was that Jay and I were working in Pattern Lab before anything in Drupal was even built. And we were able to keep that parallel path going while we actually worked from XD into building out some of these patterns and testing things here, while the other developers at Oomph were starting to build the back end to build out the content model, and then Jordan was working with us to stitch it all together. And it has ended up that we started back-end development in August. We started working on the theme actively not even into, I guess it was probably mid to late September, and we had a working example of this sometime in October and live sites by the beginning of December. So it was really a pretty incredible pace, and all of this was really done. We had basically 5 or 6 people total on the team, and so like the amount that we've been able to do, and if you look at all of these different sites and you see all of the different content structures and patterns that we've been able to build out, from numbered step components to all the media includes, image galleries, different kinds of other kinds of content includes, and accordions, and all of this other stuff that has handled the import of hundreds and hundreds of pages and thousands of documents from other agency websites already. And it's just really been kind of incredible how much we've been able to do.
Agreed, and that reminds me, I never had to spin up a local Drupal instance. I was able to work in Pattern Lab the entire time.
That was, I was really happy that we were able to do that. So, I mean, one of the things that I learned early on was the ability to separate those things and keep those lanes of work going smoothly. Being able to involve more designers in working in Pattern Lab directly has really helped free us from these bottlenecks that we typically have, where you can't start doing theming because you haven't built out the content types, and you know, all those things kind of prevent you from really making a lot of simultaneous progress. And this is now giving us something that other agencies are now, and development teams are actually looking at Pattern Lab with other things that they're building. And that's the reason why we wanted to keep these things separate, so that anybody can go and pull the ECMS Pattern Lab and then start to integrate that into their application. So we've got one team that I've met with that's working on something for the DMV for the scheduling thing, like they're looking at it. And we had somebody else actually spin up another local static site generator that pulled in the Pattern Lab as well. So it's going to allow this design system to do a lot more than only power Drupal sites, and that was really important. I'm really excited that that's working so far.
Yep. We are about 10 minutes left. Do we want to start questions? Open for questions?
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I'm going to try to speak for everybody at this webinar and say this is epic. I have a ton of questions, but and I'll lead off with one, which is just kind of overall, what user story or requirement, or what was the impetus for the whole kind of complex intelligent automated color scheme? Like, where did that all come from?
Oh boy. I think accessibility drove a lot of the thinking for this. As a government system, it really had to. So knowing that we wanted to support accessibility led us to make some architectural decisions, certainly when it came to some of the design components, but particularly when it came to color, we also wanted to make sure that we had a lot of flexibility. So we had to work within the guardrails of accessibility to make sure that we still had flexibility, but that the onus was never put on the author of the site to make a decision that they shouldn't make. So if they pick a background color, we handle the rest. We handle the foreground color. We handle the switch from light to dark mode. You know, like, they should not have to think about that. So that kind of level of automation, I guess, to answer your question as succinctly as I can, accessibility was the user story, but the author story really also figured in quite a bit into how we wanted this to work for the agencies.
So to add to that, there's a whole layer of consideration. So from sort of like the outside, we knew we wanted to have certain things remain consistent across this experience, because research will tell you, if you look at it carefully, really, I think this is probably true with any state, that a typical site visitor's journey to accomplish some task interacting with the state government is going to involve multiple agency sites. That's just kind of the nature of these things. So what ends up happening is they go from one site to another, and we wanted to have these consistent through lines. And so we have the typography remains the same across all of them. And then the colors always have a couple of familiar touchstones as you go from one to the other. And so you'll always feel connected when you go to these. So that was one piece of it. And we wanted to ensure, like Jay said, that it's a government website. It has to work for everybody. And those considerations are not just contrast, but also performance. So we've been pretty ruthless when it comes to optimizing the front end, leveraging caching infrastructure, leveraging everything that Drupal can do. The homepage on this, when we launched, I'm pretty sure it's still in the same ballpark for the COVID site, was 600K. And 300 of that is this virtual chat bot. So we've been really, really strict about how we do these things, leveraging a lot of SVG, HSLA with the coloring. All that. We've been really, really rigorous about peeling back the layers of divs and all of that stuff in the way we work with this stuff. And then we also wanted to make sure, as Jay said, the author experience is easy and clear. We give them keywords, we give them small, medium, and large images rather than then giving people choice about size. We give them like keyword names for background colors, and then they don't have a choice about the text that goes on it, so that we make sure that it follows those conventions. And then the developer experience was also equally important. We wanted to ensure that we're loading one site and one set of files, so that as you learn the functional names of things, you don't have to worry about the specifics. And over time, that has made it less and less onerous to create a new pattern and fit it into this environment, because all of those things tend to be driven automatically. So we've tried to address this at every step to make sure that everything can stay consistent while still creating the variety, because we also, we're building a platform to build many things. It's not just designing for one agency, it's designing for the entire state. And we're not designing one website, we're designing a platform to build 1,000 websites. And so that's what's been really kind of fascinating about this, always having to think at these sort of different altitudes as we go, and think about those different user stories, as you say.
Yeah.
I have one question from Ruth, who asks, did you run into any government bureaucracy making the Quahog system open source?
So, no. And so what has been really refreshing about working on this project is that we have had an enormous amount of faith placed in us by the folks that we work with at the state. And Bob Martin, who's the guy in particular that I work with most closely, he and I set all these things up, and we just left it this way. And so that no one has second guessed any of these decisions. They've allowed us to drive all of the conversation when it comes to accessibility, about design flexibility, about performance, and so it's been kind of a dream project in that respect. And I'm so excited to see more and more of these sites launch over the next month or so, and then moving into the next migration sets. So it's been really pretty fantastic so far. Big hat tip to Rhode Island for the faith that they've put in this process.
Yeah, that's great. Stephen has a question, and he understands that this is a state website, but did you look at USWDS, which is a federal government web design system?
I'm very familiar with it and have looked at it often. I wouldn't say that we necessarily referenced it specifically. I have feelings just in areas around the typography and around our need to add color theming as another layer on this, really kept us from being able to do anything specifically with that. But it certainly guided the spirit of this project, as it did with the work that I did with Lullabot on the Georgia web platform as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, actually the UK.gov series platform was also an inspiration, more so when it came to some of the accessibility stuff that they were thinking about.
Yeah, and also I wouldn't want to not mention our neighbors to the north here. We're in Rhode Island, but the team in Massachusetts has been incredible in what they've done as well. Some of our biggest inspirations were UK, Georgia, and the Mass.gov team. They really have done an incredible job with their platform, and actually the Boston web team as well.
That's great. I don't see any more questions. If anyone, we have one more from Mary. How many team members were involved on the project?
So the core team consisted of Bob Martin, who's the head of the web services team at Rhode Island, and a project manager, Valentin Torres, who has worked with us on the state. And then initially, the project manager that was on the team at NIC was Lori Stedman, who is just a lovely person. And I was really sad that she ended up having to depart. But we now have Nicole Dignenica, who joined a few months ago, and she has done an incredible job as the project manager, but also has been helping me develop and deliver training materials for these different state agencies to get their content authors up to speed. She also helped develop all of the written documentation based on my messy bit of notes, so that we've had, that's how we have all of these. We have 6 different demo sites. We've got the documentation site. We're starting to prepare to do some recordings of the workshops that we do. So we're really trying to build up a good library of documentation for the agencies, as well as documenting the site creation process for the internal web team as well. Oh, and then, like I said, there was probably 6 or so of us total at Oomph and myself doing all of the work to do the design, the
it's only about
10 from encoding.
10 in total, yeah.
Yeah. It was a small team, and it allowed us, I think, to be really focused on the individual things that we had to get done.
Joseph asks, what was the content import process like?
That is an ongoing challenge, but what the team at Oomph set up for us that has been working pretty well is we use an SEO tool to scrape the existing site, and we have a couple sets of migration scripts baked in, so that we can point to a spreadsheet that has a list of URLs, either for documents or one for files. And when we run the import, it will bring, so files, for example, it's hugely important that we maintain the old URLs because everybody has bookmarks to different versions of tax forms and all of this other stuff. So it's critical that we maintain that level of access. What we do is bring in those files as file entities. We then map URL redirects with the old URL to the new one, pointing to the file. And then the third step is actually to make a media item out of it. So we can then have a file listing component that will list the file, tell you what kind of file it is, show the approximate file size, and then that gives us a way, wherever they're used throughout the site, to have one source to go back to update the underlying file. Pages work somewhat similar in that we have a list of URLs that we put in a Google spreadsheet that we look at to run the import, and then we look at the page structure and pick a couple of CSS targets for us to pick where we want to scrape, and then we have people that are manually doing some of the other work to tidy things up, because we are coming from 15-year evolution of templates of mostly static websites that we're pulling things in. So it can't be completely automated, but this has been, like I said, it took me about 15 minutes to import everything for the climate change website. And it takes a little bit longer for a bigger set of pages, but Executive Office of Health and Human Services, 2,500 files and 800 pages, and we had that done in a few hours.
Yeah. And some of these sites, like 15 years means that those are Dreamweaver templates. Seriously.
Well, actually, they're all Dreamweaver templates. That's actually how they're still. Any one of these sites that's being maintained right now is actually still being maintained with Dreamweaver. So it's a pretty big step forward.
Yeah.
I feel like with any migration, you have to become you inevitably become a Google Sheets expert as well.
It's true.
We feel like archivists in a way, like historians, like archaeologists.
We've got a couple more minutes here.
Sure.
Chris has two more questions, then we'll wrap up. Chris has a question. Do you see a role for Acquia Site Studio for layout and authoring pages and sites?
I don't know that we do, because of the way this works, we're deploying everything, and every single one of these sites on Site Factory is the same code base, and so we have a landing page content type that's already been defined that has all of these options for 1 to 4 columns, and do you want a background color? Do you want, like, all of these things are kind of baked in. And then on the page development side, we're using various different content components, basically paragraph bundles that we've defined to allow people to build up these fairly interesting and sometimes kind of complex different content structures. So actually, this wasn't a good example. Let's go to here. So, you know, it's basic text, but then you can add a column container with card components and embedded video and media, and all of these things are translatable, and there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. And just to address the other question about navigation, we can actually handle 4 or 5 layers deep pretty gracefully by a combination of this nested navigation here. This is recursive, so it will kind of work all the way down. And what I really love about the way this works, I want to find one on one of the other sites that's maybe that goes a little deeper. So if we look under Connect here, some of these things actually have more than 1 layer down. I'm sure I won't find one now because I'm looking for it. But if we look at this on mobile, if I pull this up over here, and we go and we here on this site, and we want to go in our mobile navigation, I think is pretty fantastic. And if we go into what we do, and we'll pick Connect, and as we scroll down, it stays right there. So we always have that secondary navigation really within thumb's reach, and it's all got nice big touch targets, and it works really well even for fairly deep structures. So that was something that we did have to think about because we're not building one site, we're building a system to build anything, and so it actually does work pretty gracefully that way.
That's great, Jay and Jason. Thank you so much for sharing your project with us, and sort of this being your first kind of public announcement. We really appreciate the time you put into it, and I got a lot out of it. It's really inspiring, and I hope everybody else did too.
Check out the GitHub. The code is fun to look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason and Jay, for sharing your expertise and insights into creating the tools that allow you to quickly spin up these sites. That was really, really good to see. And Design for Drupal really appreciates, like Katic said, you taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was really excited for us to be able to show this off really in depth like this for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Yeah. All right.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for all the questions.
All right.